There aren't many moments in my life where I will vividly remember where I was when it happened. I'm honestly struggling to come up with similar things that have happened in my lifetime. What are some of the things that could have maybe put in the same tier as this one event? The coronavirus pandemic? The invasion of Crimea and Ukraine? The January 6th insurrection? That list of events is all short and recent. However, the death of a monarch, the death of the longest reigning monarch in British history, might just be at the top of that list. And that's not because Britain is unstable or anything with her death. No, it's because it's a constant presence that I eventually knew would come to an end. And that end has come. Queen Elizabeth was born Elizabeth Alexandra Mary, or Princess Elizabeth of York, on April 21st, 1926. Her father was Prince Albert, Duke of York, and her mother was Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon, Duchess of York. Her only sibling was born 4 years later and given the name Margaret, or Princess Margaret. The two princesses were privately educated under the supervision of their mother and the governess. In 1950, the governess Marion Crawford published a book called The Little Princesses, which detailed the lives of Elizabeth and Margaret to that point. Elizabeth was described as being responsible and having a sense of duty while also still being a kid. The best description I can find of Elizabeth at a young age is by her cousin Margaret Rhodes, where she described Elizabeth as being a jolly little girl, but fundamentally sensible and well-behaved. Now, Elizabeth wasn't supposed to be a queen. She was born as the third in line for succession behind her uncle Edward and her own father. When her grandfather passed away in 1936, the line of succession moved by one. Now, Elizabeth was second in line for the throne after her father. But if the newly crowned King Albert had any kids, they would immediately supersede Elizabeth's right to the throne. Well, this didn't happen. In fact, King Edward abdicated the throne because he wanted to marry someone who was already divorced once, which is a big no-no in the Church of England. So Elizabeth's father took the throne and named himself King George VI. Now, finally, Elizabeth was the heir presumptive. However, if her parents bore any son, Elizabeth would be forced behind that son for the crown. Yes, this is like this is most of the time we hear does not keep misogyny, but one of those facts we have to cover strictly. Whoa, that was weird. Anyway, here's a cool fact to distract you from the disclaimer that just rolled across your screen. In 1939, Elizabeth's parents toured Canada and the United States. Her parents decided that Elizabeth was too young to join them. However, on May 18th, Elizabeth and her parents made the first royal transatlantic phone call. Something else that also happened later that year that affected everyone in the world, including Elizabeth, was World War II. When the war began, people suggested that the princesses Elizabeth and Margaret should evacuate to Canada to avoid the area bombings. In response, their mother gave one of the coolest quotes I've ever heard. "The children won't go without me. I won't leave the king. And the king will never leave." During the war, Elizabeth and her sister spent the majority of their time studying and helping lift the spirits of the people. In 1940, Elizabeth made her first radio broadcast during the BBC's Children's Hour. The whole speech is about 4 minutes long, so I won't be playing the whole thing, but here is the portion I love the most.
Before I finish, I can truthfully say to you all that we children at home are full of cheerfulness and courage. We are trying to do all we can to help our gallant sailors, soldiers, and airmen. And we are trying, too, to bear our own share of the danger and sadness of war. We know, every one of us, that in the end all will be well, for God will care for us and give us victory and peace. And when peace comes, remember, it will be for us, the children of today, to make the world of tomorrow a better and happier place.
However, as Elizabeth grew older, she was given more duties. In 1942, she was promoted to Colonel of the Grenadier Guards, and as she got closer to her 18th birthday, Parliament changed the law so that she could act in the event of her father's incapacity or absence abroad. In 1945, she was appointed as the female equivalent of captain in the Auxiliary Territorial Service, or the women's branch of the British Army. She worked as a driver and mechanic. At the end of the war, Elizabeth and her sister joined the people on the streets to party. Thankfully, she wasn't recognized. On November 20th, 1947, Princess Elizabeth and Prince Philip got married. However, unlike a lot of royal marriages, their marriage was born out of love. At the age of 13, Elizabeth had met Philip at the Royal Naval Academy in Dartmouth, and Elizabeth said she fell in love. However, thankfully, the two waited until the age of 21 to get engaged. There was a fair amount of controversy with this engagement, specifically with Philip. He had no financial standing, he was foreign-born, and he had sisters who married Nazis. Honestly, not a good rap sheet to show the parents. Anyway, this was quickly smoothed over by having Philip cut all ties with Nazis and family members who married Nazis, convert to Anglicanism, adopt the British surname, and made the Duke of Edinburgh.
This is London. It is with the greatest sorrow that we make the following announcement. It was announced from Sandringham at 10:45 today, February the 6th, 1952, that the King, who retired to rest last night in his usual health, passed peacefully away in his sleep earlier this morning.
On February 6, 1952, King George VI passed away, thanks to a law that immediately made Elizabeth the new queen. However, she was actually in Kenya coming back from a trip from Australia and New Zealand. Elizabeth and Philip were at their hotel when Philip broke the news to his wife. Side note, how would that conversation even go? Do you just say, honey, I'm sorry, your dad's dead? Anyway, Elizabeth chose to keep her name and from then on would be known as Queen Elizabeth II. The house should have taken Philip's name, but Queen Elizabeth chose to use the name House of Windsor. Queen Elizabeth oversaw the fall of an empire. When she ascended to the throne, the British Empire was transforming into a commonwealth of nations. Even by the time she gained the throne, a number of independent nations had already been formed from the British Empire. Even still, shortly after her coronation, Queen Elizabeth and Prince Philip traveled to 13 countries and over 40,000 miles. In that time, she became the first reigning monarch to visit Australia and New Zealand. In 1957, she visited the United Nations General Assembly on behalf of the Commonwealth and became the first monarch to open a session of Parliament in Canada. In 1961, the President of Ghana warned against Queen Elizabeth visiting the country because there were assassins after him. Queen Elizabeth still visited the President, and this left a major impression on everyone involved. The same situation happened in 1964 in Quebec. As the 1960s rolled into the 1970s, decolonization continued throughout Africa and the Caribbean. Queen Elizabeth refused to interfere with the rolling independence movement and just let the countries go. There were some countries that declared independence and named Queen Elizabeth as the queen of their country. I'm looking at you, Rhodesia, but they were politely declined. Still, Queen Elizabeth traveled to Yugoslavia in 1972, making her the first British monarch to visit a communist country. In 1977, Queen Elizabeth reached her Silver Jubilee, or the 25th anniversary of her reign. There were many parties and they all reconfirmed how popular Queen Elizabeth was. The 1980s brought a bit of controversy to the royal family and Queen Elizabeth. First of all, in 1981, there were 2 assassination attempts on Queen Elizabeth. The first fired 6 planes at close range, and the second one fired 1 shot from the 5th story of a building, but missed. As the 1980s continued, the media perpetuated apparent falsehoods that honestly were lies to create news. The news was between Queen Elizabeth and the royal family versus the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, with the news saying Queen Elizabeth wasn't happy with Margaret's policies, which was true because the Queen would vote in opposition to the policies. However, there was a lot of smoke, but no fire. Even the smoke that was there was blown completely out of proportion. Even still, Queen Elizabeth became the first British monarch to visit China in 1986. The 1990s were arguably worse for Queen Elizabeth. She had her Ruby Jubilee on her 40th anniversary in 1992, but she personally described that year as Annus Horribilis, that being Latin for horrible year. First of all, Republican feelings had risen because of the estimates of Queen Elizabeth's private wealth, which led to royal finance reforms and an income tax for Queen Elizabeth. Then there were a lot of reports of affairs and strained marriages all throughout the royal family. Most famously, the separation of Prince Charles and Princess Diana. In 1994, she broke a bone in her wrist and also became the first monarch to visit Russia. Then in 1997, Princess Diana died in a car accident, and the Queen gained more criticism by not publicly reacting to her death until a public broadcast the day before Diana's funeral. In that broadcast, she talked about her admiration for Diana and her feelings as the grandmother of Diana's children. This broadcast resulted in public criticism essentially evaporating. Also in 1997, Queen Elizabeth visited the Jallianwala Bagh massacre in India. Despite protesters chanting "Kill Her Queen, go away," she and Philip paid their respects at the memorial and held a 30-second moment of silence. The next two major events would be Queen Elizabeth's Golden and Diamond Jubilee, which were her 50th and 60th anniversaries, respectively. Throughout the 2000s and 2010, Queen Elizabeth took a step back from playing an active role in the government as age crept up on her. In 2003, she had keyhole surgery in both of her knees, and in 2006, she missed the opening of a new stadium because of a strained back muscle. However, she still traveled to the United Nations General Assembly in 2010, where UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon introduced her as an anchor for our age. On December 18, 2012, Queen Elizabeth became the first British sovereign to watch over a peacetime cabinet meeting since George III in 1781. She also opened the 2012 Summer Olympics and Paralympics in London. This made her the first head of state to open two Olympic Games in two countries because she also opened the 1976 Summer Olympics in Montreal. In 2013, she was hospitalized overnight because she was developing symptoms of gastroenteritis. However, because of her age, she chose not to attend the biennial Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting for the first time in 40 years. But here are even more firsts that all happened since 2007. Queen Elizabeth passed her great-great-grandmother, Queen Victoria, as the longest-living British monarch on December 21st, 2007. She became the longest-reigning British monarch and the longest-reigning Queen Regent and female head of state in the world on September 9th, 2015. She became the oldest current monarch in the world after King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia passed away on January 23rd, 2015. She became the longest-reigning current monarch and longest-serving current head of state after the death of King Bhumibol of Thailand on October 13, 2016. Apologies if I messed up that name. She became the oldest current head of state with the resignation of Robert Mugabe on November 21st, 2017. And closer to home, she became the first British monarch to commemorate a Sapphire Jubilee on February 6, 2017. And on November 20th of the same year, she became the first British monarch to celebrate a Platinum wedding anniversary. And this is also not including her Platinum Jubilee that she celebrated in 2022. Oh, and did I mention that she is the second longest reigning sovereign in world history? She was only about a year and a half off of Louis XIV of France. In more recent years, the Queen was still beloved throughout the country. During the COVID-19 pandemic, she got on national television once again, and this was her remark.
We should take comfort that while we may have more still to endure, better days will return. We will be with our friends again. We will be with our families again. We will meet again. But for now, I send my thanks and warmest good wishes to you all.
Then, on April 9th, 2021, her husband Philip passed away after 73 years of marriage. This, sadly, made Queen Elizabeth the first British monarch to reign as a widow or widower since Queen Victoria. Nearly a year later, in February of 2022, Queen Elizabeth caught COVID-19 but was able to push past it. And finally, on September 8th, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II passed away.
But through the inventions of science, I can do what was not possible for any of them. I can make my solemn act of dedication with the whole empire listening. I should like to make that dedication now. It is very simple. I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. But I shall not have strength to carry out this resolution alone, unless you join in it with me, as I now invite you to do. I know that your support will be unfailingly given. God help me to make good my vow, and God bless all of you who are willing to share in it.
I had a lot of trouble in finding out the way I wanted to end this video. I've only experienced one death in my family, and that was my father in 2021. When that happened, I was able to grieve properly and get through that stronger on the other side. But I think how I will end this video is by showing you the speech that the new King Charles III made after his mother passed away. His mother's death now has every eyes in the world looking at him, even if they aren't affected by what he says directly. He has a tall hill to climb, but he also has to grieve. When I first saw his face, I knew that that was a man grieving. So, before I play the video and leave you guys for the day, thank you for watching this video. Keep your loved ones close and tell them you love them. Stay safe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.
I speak to you today with feelings of profound sorrow. Throughout her life, Her Majesty the Queen, my beloved mother, was an inspiration, an example to me and to all my family. And we owe her the most heartfelt debt any family could owe to their mother, for her love, affection, guidance, understanding, and example. Queen Elizabeth was a life well lived, a promise with destiny kept, and she is mourned most deeply in her passing. That promise of lifelong service I renew to you all today.